Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday morning. I've got my coffee, of course. I'm super excited to get day 2 of this new series off the ground. I really like this. I don't know why, I just have this really delightful feeling. It was nice reading the comments on day 1 yesterday, and it just feels like we're kind of in this together because it's quite a challenge to do a video every single day. But it feels really good to get some of you commenting and asking me questions and sharing memories of us together on this channel. It's unbelievable how some of you have been following my sort of crazy journey for like 6 years at this point. Anyway, just love it. Thank you for commenting and supporting. You'll notice that I've done a couple new things in my background here. So I've got my books on this side, my plant. Would love to know if you like this new setup. I'm going to be trying a lot of new things on these daily videos. So yesterday I got my very first question on these daily language diary videos, which was from Peggy Trotman. And she wanted to know about how to immerse yourself in a foreign language. And I believe this is sort of from the perspective of when you're at home or not in a country where that language is spoken. Now, in my book, How to Maintain Languages, I have a whole chapter that I wrote all about creating an immersion bubble. That's what I call it. And so I thought about just like pulling that chapter into one of these videos, but I realized I have a lot to say on this topic and it could be a very well-structured video, but if you remember, that's kind of not the point of these daily diaries, right? So today I'm gonna just tell you what I think at least is a really nice story. Where it was one of the most successful times for me that I created an immersion bubble with French. And I think this will really, hopefully just be a nice story. And I think it will really give you a good perspective on how you might go about immersing yourself in a foreign language that you're learning while being at home, and extremely effectively. And then I'll definitely plan to make a longer, more structured video all about how to actually go through the process of creating a bubble and the pros and cons and different techniques. But let's jump into my story. I love story time, especially with a nice coffee. So it was 2015, and that was a crazy year for me. I had actually already been living in Lisbon, Portugal, working as a French customer service agent for Expedia France, but in Lisbon, Portugal. It was a weird situation. By the way, if you ever want to really challenge your language skills, working in a call center, being shouted at all day by angry travelers is a really good way to test your comprehension skills for sure. But after that, I moved to Hamburg, Germany, and I was working for a fashion startup, and I really loved living in Hamburg. It was a wonderful experience. But that startup actually lost one of their biggest investors, and most of us lost our job. And so I ended up back in the United States, where I went to university. Now at the time, I had just fallen in love with French so deeply. And many of you know that I wrote a book, but at this time I was actually writing a novel. So I was doing fictional writing, and I even chose to write it in French. I was so in love with French literature, French cinema, even French theater, which came a bit later. And so I decided to create a French immersion bubble for myself. And honestly, what happened over the next few months was just, I would say it's one of the most special memories of my sort of language learning life. But to be honest, God, there's so many good stories that I could tell you. But so what I did is I had a number of resources, and this is why I always say it's very helpful, especially as you're a beginner. I don't necessarily recommend trying to, fully immerse yourself cold turkey in a really deep way if you're a beginner in the language. We can talk about that at a different video. But what I do recommend is starting to collect resources, right? Starting to watch films, even if you have subtitles. Starting to gather kind of a stockpile of books and movies, podcasts, whatever you can. It's really nice to collect resources early on so that when you get to a stage where you can finally really take advantage of those resources, you already have them, they're just waiting for you. So with French, I had a number of just beautiful, gorgeous resources. I love them so much. So I had a daily sort of cultural news podcast called Laissez-vous tenter. And I think it was basically every single day they had an episode, and it was a radio show, and oh, it was just great. It didn't have any really political news, but it was all cultural stuff. So they would have interviews with movie directors. They would talk about new theater productions. They would have these really awesome segments where they would have like a singer who's really popular today. Somebody like Stromae was one example. And they would have them in a room with another singer who they idolized when they were children. So in this case, I think it was Stromae having a conversation with Charles Aznavour. By the way, Charles Aznavour is one of my favorite singers and artists ever. And you would get to listen to these two people having a conversation. It's from two completely different eras, different times, different genres of music, and it was just so cool. Now, I had another podcast which I loved, and it was called Chemin d'écrivain, which means sort of the path of authors. And every episode, an author would be on location, so you'd hear the sounds of their surroundings and everything, and they'd be talking about how a particular place was important in their career as an author, how it shaped them, right? So I remember Marc Lévy. In fact, I think this is a book from Marc Lévy. I have, I think, all of his books. So he was living in Paris. He actually was an architect previously, and then he was working for La Croix-Rouge, the Red Cross. And he was raising his son in their small apartment in Paris. And what he would do is he would write his first novel at night while his son was sleeping. And so they were in Paris, and you could hear the cars honking and everything. It was just great. So I had these podcasts, and I would listen to them every day. I was reading all my books in French. I would watch my movies in French. I would see these movies that I loved, and I'd watch them 2 or 3 times. I just was completely surrounding myself in French. Now, I do want to make a distinction though. It's not that I decided to do full mass immersion. So I was still happy to talk to somebody in English. I still went to my job. I got like a little job at a retail store right after I came back from Germany. And I also was still studying other languages. I remember during this time, I would study Italian on my lunch breaks at work. And that was when I was really starting to become pretty good at Italian. So creating an immersion bubble doesn't mean that you go cold turkey, that you never speak your native language or you don't study other languages. You can totally create a very, very effective immersion bubble. It's just a lot of it is about the media that you consume. And in my case, as I mentioned, I was also writing a novel in French, which was an incredible procedure or process to go through because, you're thinking so carefully about the language that you are putting from yourself onto this piece of paper. I was even reading a book about how to write a novel, but I was reading it in French. And so I was getting, I think you get the idea. This was just an amazing period of my life. And what happened is I genuinely, it felt like I was living in France. I honestly think I knew more about what was happening in France at the time. I knew more about French literature. I knew like all of the top French authors, both modern and historical. I knew more about even French theater. In English, or in the English-speaking world, I've always been very bad at remembering the names of actors and actresses, but I actually knew like all the top actors and actresses in French movies. I knew who were sort of famous for comedy and who weren't. You start to feel like an insider. It's really cool. It really does. It's a little bit, it feels like you're living in that country, or perhaps there are several countries that speak the language. Like in Spanish, there are many, many countries, and you could be sort of taking pieces from all sorts of places. And like I said, you get this feeling of being kind of an insider, that when you hear things about France, for example, you have this like rich societal sort of cultural context that you now see those things through. And I love it. Okay, I really hope you enjoyed that story. I hope it helps give you some really nice ideas, Peggy, on how you might go about immersing yourself in Spanish in your case, but this should work for any language. The key, of course, is having those resources. And so anybody, please feel free to leave comments if you want to try this. I can happily do my best to give recommendations for the languages that I've studied. and hopefully we can help each other. I don't know, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this. So thank you for watching. I can't wait for tomorrow. I have no idea what we're gonna talk about, but it's gonna be cool. It's gonna be awesome. So, and yeah, have a great Tuesday.